Gosh, Heritage Park, it is so good to be here with you guys this morning. As Stephen said, I have had the privilege of knowing him and Kelsey for a long time. I worked with them together, and I can't tell you how excited I am that you guys get to know him. I'm sure that he's excited to get to know you. I'm sure that this will be a mutual thing, but gosh, I love Stephen Collins. And I'm so thankful that he is your lead pastor. It's gonna be so exciting to see what happens over this next year and these next few years with him here. And so I say that because if I say something that maybe rubs you the wrong way or maybe offends you, I wanna make it very clear that I want you to email directly Stephen Collins. If anything happens there that you don't appreciate or don't like, he prefers them late at night before he goes to bed or 10 minutes before he preaches. So those are his preferred times for those types of emails. So if you can do that, that would be great. As Stephen pointed out, I am the executive director of an organization called Grace-Based Families. We are a faith-based media nonprofit that exists to help ordinary parents raise and launch extraordinary kids. We do that by looking at God's big plan for families throughout the Bible and applying them to the big job of raising kids. And because of that, I spend a lot of time looking at the Bible and looking at how God, as a father, parents his children, how he models that behavior for us, and ultimately lays out his theology and his idea of what it means to be a family. And I love getting to look at this because as it turns out, the Bible has a lot to say about family. I'm sure you'll hear this over and over again from Stephen. You can understand the Bible in a number of different ways. I think probably the best way is this is a book about God and his redemptive work in the world. It is a book where it starts with creation and you get to the fall and all of the promise that leads up to Jesus. Jesus redeems and saves the world and is using his people to carry out his work until the new kingdom. And that is, I think, how you understand the Bible. But what I love about the way God tells this story is he tells it through a lot of little stories about families. Family is not just some side part of God's plan. In many ways, family is the way in which God chose to redeem his world and his creation. And so I want to kick off this year with this radical call and reality that we see pervasive throughout the scriptures. And that is that God is calling your family. God is calling your family into his redemptive adventure to save the world from sin and death. God is calling your family. And you might be thinking, are you sure? Do you know my family? Do you know how much sin we committed this morning to get here on time? So I've got 4 kids, and let me just say, I feel like the least Christian I feel is pulling into the parking lot on Sunday morning after barreling through all the morning trying to get them to look like decent, functioning human beings showing up at church. So I get it. You might be hearing this and thinking yeah, maybe some other family, but is God really calling my family to this? And before we really get into it, I want to kind of point out just some of the families that God used to do what he did. Start with Adam and Eve. We know who Adam and Eve is. That's where the book starts. They brought sin and judgment into the world. They banished us from Eden of God's presence, and then their son killed their other son. Okay, that's the first family that God used to bring about his plan of redemption. Because we also know that through her lineage, the serpent's head would be crushed, that Jesus would ultimately come and redeem the world. That's sibling rivalry right there. If you think your sibling rivalry is bad, at least your son didn't kill your other son. Noah, this man of faith who got the ark, did the whole thing. Afterwards, he got so drunk after the whole boat fiasco that he passed out naked, flashing his family, which brought a curse on his sons. That's in the Bible. You thought your Thanksgiving was bad, okay? That's a rough story. Yet it was through Noah and his family that the earth was saved through the ark. Abraham and Sarah, yes, Father Abraham, the man who God called to launch his people into this redemptive history. He lied twice and tried to pass his wife off as his sister to save his own skin. Guys, do not recommend. Don't try that. He also knocked up his servant and then tried to abandon her and his son. Once he did have a son, he brought him onto a mountain and got real close to sacrificing him. Now let me tell you, I've gotten frustrated with my kids, but to be fair, I've never gotten real close to sacrificing them. Yet this is the family through which God chose to bring about his blessing of redemption. Isaac, his son that he almost sacrificed, and Rebekah played favorites with their twins, pitting them against each other to the point that Jacob, his one son, deceived his father and stole his birthright from his other son, Esau. Jacob had 2 wives and 2 concubines, also played favorites, and ultimately his kids sold his favorite child into slavery. Judah, one of the guys who sold the kid into slavery, who is the direct ancestor to Jesus, slept with his daughter-in-law, but only because he thought she was a prostitute. I'm not even out of the book of Genesis, okay? I'm not even out of the book of Genesis. We're gonna skip Judges altogether. We don't need to talk about it. We go to David, the man after God's own heart, who is also an ancestor to Jesus, slept with a woman who's not his wife and then had her husband killed. We can look even to the New Testament. Peter, the rock upon which the church was built, at his lowest point was an anger-prone coward who abandoned Jesus at his most critical hour. Paul, the guy who wrote most of the New Testament, murdered Christians as his job. That was his job before becoming a Christian. He murdered Christians. Imagine the staff Christmas parties after that happened. That had to be weird. This is who God called into his redemptive story. This is who God called into his redemptive adventure. These are the families that God chose to use to bring about his incredible rescue of the world. So I'm telling you this because if God can use these families to do that, God can definitely use yours. And I know that not everybody here maybe feels like they're in a traditional family setting. And I get that, but I wanna make it clear that just because you didn't show up with a minivan, this message is still for you. Because I'm assuming you're probably a son or a daughter. You might be a mother or father. You might be a grandma, grandpa. You might be an aunt or an uncle. You might be a dog mom or a dog dad. But of course, this is in Portland, so that's not as relevant here. Regardless of who you are, God is calling you into his redemptive adventure, and I want you to hear that. God is calling you into his redemptive adventure. Now, there's a person that I didn't mention leading up to this, and it's not because he doesn't fit the whole narrative that I'm building. It's because we're gonna focus in on him. We're gonna be talking today about Moses, and we're gonna be looking at how Moses was called into this calling, into God's incredible adventure of rescuing specifically his people out of Egypt, out of slavery, and bringing them into the land that he promised. Today we're gonna be looking at really 4 ways that God has equipped your family to do this work. 4 ways that God has equipped your family. And we're gonna do this by looking at how Moses was called, all the pushback that Moses gave against God's calling on him, and all the ways that God showed up, responded to him, and equipped him to be sent out to do the work that he was called to do. So to give a little background on Moses, he was famously the baby that was put in the basket, sent up the river, found by the Egyptians. It is this Israelite raised in the courts of Egypt. When he finds out about the suffering of his people, he confronts an Egyptian and he murders him, and then he runs away. He flees to the desert and is there for 40 years. While he's there, he gets married. He has kids, he builds a family, he builds a life, he joins the family business. He's a shepherd. And that's where we kind of pick up in the story in Exodus chapter 3. He is out watching Jethro's sheep, and I love that his father-in-law's name is Jethro. It's a great father-in-law name. He's watching his sheep, He notices a bush that is burning on the side of a mountain and thinks, that's weird. I'm either really dehydrated or something is happening over here. So he goes and checks it out. The bush starts speaking to him, which is also weird. And he realizes, okay, something really is happening and God is speaking to him. He takes off his shoes, he enters into this space and ultimately enters into this dialogue with God that brings him to a point where he is calling him to rescue his people out of Egypt. And we pick up on this verse, and this is the verse that Stephen read earlier, where after this back and forth, God says to Moses, come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. See, in this moment, God is calling Moses and Moses' family, and I want to point that out. Moses was not some lone ranger out there. Moses had kids, he had a wife, he had a father-in-law. He was embedded, deeply rooted in where he was. He'd been there for 40 years. This wasn't just some 3-month thing that he was out there hiding. He's been there for 40 years. He calls him into his redemptive adventure in the same way that God is calling you. So the first thing we're gonna see in how God has equipped your family to answer this call is God has equipped your family with this promise. God has equipped your family with his promise. We pick up in verse 11. After God calls him to this, Moses doesn't say, okay, I'll go. Moses has a very long dialogue trying to push back and say, no, it can't be me, please send somebody else. He says in verse 11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Remember, Moses would be known there. They knew who Moses was, but they knew him as a murderer, a guy who fled and ran away. He's like, who am I? And I think this is oftentimes a question that we ask, right? When God calls us into doing the work that God has called us to do, we ask, who am I? Are you sure you know who I am? I'm tending sheep in the desert, on the run from a past that I don't want to revisit. Do you know who I am? And what I love is that God replies with, yes, I do. But it's not the way that he knows himself. In verse 12, he says, God said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. God replies, yes, I know you. I do know who you are. And I promise that you will one day worship again on this mountain when this is all over. I know how this story ends. I know where you end up. And this, I think, should give the people of God so much joy. That regardless of where we're at in the journey, regardless of where we are in our lives, with our family, with ourselves, God knows the ending of our story, and it's a good one. Eugene Peterson writes in A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, he says, joy is nurtured by anticipation. If the joy-producing acts of God are characteristic of our future as his people, there is no reason to suppose that God will arbitrarily change his way of working with us. What we have known of him, we will know of him. Just as joy builds on the past, it borrows from the future. It expects certain things to happen. Who here enjoys road trips? Okay, that's cute of you. That's nice. I'm glad for you. It must be fun. Like I said, I have 4 kids, and let's say I don't enjoy road trips. But because I have 4 kids, we have to take them. Because we also want to eat. So we have to drive places if we want to go to there. One of the common places we'll go is we'll drive every summer down to Southern California. I meet up with my extended family there. Spend a week on the beach, and it's great. We love it down there. It's awesome. We have so much joy, so much connectedness. We are a great family. If you were to see our family on the beach in California, you would think this is it. This is a great family. But if you were to see our family driving through Stockton, you would have different thoughts about our family, or Chico, for that matter. We are not great on road trips. okay? We're cranky, we never have enough snacks, we're bored. But we know, and the thing that keeps us going, the thing that keeps us driving, the thing that brought us into the middle of nowhere, California in the first place, is the fact that we know that one day we will be that family on the beach. There is the promise that keeps us going. What I love about this, the way God responds to Moses here, is that he looks at Moses and says, I know that you are not the guy watching your father-in-law's sheep. You might see yourself as that, but I know that's not you. You're the leader who will worship me on this very mountain after leading my people out of slavery. That's who you are. We're not the family yelling at each other for more snacks on the road trip. We're the family delighting on the beach and taking great sunset pictures, because that's what you drive all that way for. It's for a sunset picture on the beach. You are not the family filled with fear, the family filled with anger or shame. You are not the family who can't seem to make it a day without a major setback or disappointment, without the tension. You are not that family. You might feel like that family right now, but you are not that family. You are the family God is making new through his Spirit, who will be filled and known by the fruits of the Spirit working in your life. You are the new creation that God has made. God has made that promise. And God has equipped you and your family with that promise to go forth and join him on his redemptive adventure. God has equipped you with his promise. Not only that, but God has equipped your family with his presence. If we look further in the story of Moses, you'd think, okay, that seemed like a pretty satisfactory answer. Moses leaves now, but that's not the case. Moses pushes back again. It says in verse 13, he says, then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, well, what's his name? What shall I say to them? So his first question is, well, who am I that you would ask me? And then his second question is, okay, well, who are you? Who are you that you should send me? Who will people care to hear from? Because he knows that they don't want to hear from him. They know that they're not interested in what he has to say. So whoever's sending him must be somebody pretty compelling. And then we get the famous line where we get the name of God finally kind of spoken and written out loud, where God said to Moses in 14, he says, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Then he goes on to say that I am the God of your fathers, the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, the God of Abraham, the God of Noah. I am that God who has done all of these great things in the past. Tell them that that God has sent you. God has equipped your family with his presence. So growing up, I loved reading The Lord of the Rings, watching The Lord of the Rings. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. And one of the great joys of fatherhood for me is when my kids get older enough to enjoy the things that I enjoyed as a kid, which unfortunately for them is not cool things. It's not the things that make friends and influence people. It's things that hole you up in your room and live in a magic world. But it's been so fun revisiting this with, we're deep in it. We live in Middle Earth in my home right now. And so if you don't know much about Lord of the Rings, there are these people called hobbits. They are small people that really don't like adventures. They like to eat food, like to smoke tobacco and have parties. And they don't like to go anywhere. They don't like to do anything. They are not brave creatures, okay? And in the story, you meet a number of these hobbits, and there's these two called Merry and Pippin. And when you see them at the beginning of the story, they are typical hobbits. They're kind of scared. They're uncertain of anything. You know, they are not the people leading the charge. And what I love is that by the end of the story, and there's this incredible scene in the books and then also in the movies where this huge battle happening at the end. You have this guy named Aragorn who is super cool. And you have Gandalf who is also super cool. And they're great fighters and all this stuff. And they're there, but you see these two little hobbits running towards the enemy, sword in hand, as brave as any other warrior on that field. You see this incredible arc. And what's funny is that the hobbits are no different. The hobbits are still really little people who probably couldn't do a whole lot of damage out there, but they are brave. I think the bravery of the hobbits is an indication of they knew who they were with. They knew who they were with, and because of that, they went forth and did the work that they were called to do. I think all Christians should have the bravery of the hobbits. All of us should have that because of who we are with. God is with your family. You might not feel that. You might not think that. You might not believe that. You might not see that all the time, but God is with your family. The God who was with Noah, the God who was with Abraham and Moses and David, the God who went with Peter and Paul and all the saints that came before us, the God who parted the seas and rose from the dead, the God who created the heavens and the earth and is restoring the broken creation into a new kingdom without end. That God is with you on this adventure. That God is with you. God has given you and equipped you with his presence. And because of that, we can go forth and answer the call to God's redemptive adventure. Not only has God equipped you with his promise and his presence, we also see that God has equipped your family with his power. God has equipped your family with his power. You'd think once again, after God drops like his name, like a total boss, you would think at that point in time, surely Moses is ready to go. Like that's like the best speech anybody could give before launching somebody off onto an adventure. It's incredible. And because in the chapter, he goes on and he talks about all that's gonna happen, all that God will do on his behalf to bring his people out of slavery. But Moses isn't ready yet. Moses still pushes back. Said, then Moses answered, and we're starting in chapter 4 now. But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice. For they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. And the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground and it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it, which by the way is what you should do if you see a serpent. You know, I grew up in Arizona where the snakes down there will kill you. And so I agree with Moses's response here. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail, which I don't also recommend for serpents, but if God tells you to do it, do it. So he put out his hand and caught it and became a staff in his hand. And God continued, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. So what's interesting is we see this series of questions, this series of kind of pushback that Moses gives to God every single time. The first is he asks, who am I that you would send me? God says, well, I'm giving you your promise. I know who you are. I know who you're gonna become. He says, okay, well, who are you to send me? It's like, well, I'm the God of your fathers. I'm the God of Abraham and Isaac. I am who I am. I am the one sending you. You're gonna be fine. So go. I'm giving you my presence. The next question he asks is, okay, well, so what can you do? Right? Prove it, essentially. It's like, okay, that's who you said, and that's compelling, but what am I to do? How are they gonna believe me? What can you do to prove that you are who you are? And then he does what he does. He says, I am giving you my power. You're gonna be able to do things that you shouldn't be able to do. I'm giving you and equipping you with my power. He goes on and he gives even more examples. And as you know, if you know the story of Moses and the story of what happens, God displays his power through Moses over and over and over again in huge, significant ways to bring his people out of Egypt. God sends his power through Moses to the point where he says, you will be as God to these people. That is the level to which God is giving his power to Moses to equip him to go out into this adventure. I don't think it's a bad question. I think it's oftentimes the question that we are asking. I think it's the question the world is asking when it's looking at any form of power. Well, what can it do? Prove it. Does it work? I think that's the driving question of our generation is, does it work? And I think we are constantly looking for power beyond ourselves to validate and fuel what we do in our lives. We look to our careers, we look to our education or our kids' education, to our political affiliations or our talents, our money, our families even, to validate and give us this power to go out and do the things that we think we're supposed to do. It is not weird that we're looking for power. It's not weird that we're trying to validate the power and say, does it work? And not that any of these things in and of themselves are wrong, but if we are relying on those things, I think what we're gonna find is that those powers are fleeting. They're really merely illusions of power, no more than paper or some cultural value or something else. We're constantly looking for power beyond ourselves, but God has equipped us with his power. We have real power. Going back to the Lord of the Rings, and I don't know what the statute of limitations is on spoiler alerts. I think it's been 80 years since the book came out and like 20 years since the movies came out. So I'm gonna give something away. So if you really care, cover your ears. But Frodo and Sam, who are the main drivers of the thing, he's given this ring of power. He ultimately does destroy the ring of power. Spoiler alert, sorry. This whole story is really a story about power. And I think that's what so fascinated me about it as a kid. Because he's able to tap into something that we all experience in some way, form. This draw of power. This draw, do we have enough power to wield what we're gonna do? Is there something else that can give us that power? And this ring that he's carrying, this ring that Sauron, the main bad guy, is trying to get, this whole thing, is driving this thing. It fuels everybody's search for power. And the only thing that's pushing against it is the hope of a better world beyond the ring's domain. What I love about the way the story ends, when Frodo, and I won't give away everything, it's a cool way it happens, okay, I won't give it all away. But when the ring goes into Mount Doom and it's destroyed in the fire, what I love is how quickly the dark powers vanish. The moment it goes, it just disappears. Sauron and his armies, everybody around him, all of this darkness, this evil, this weight that has been weighing down on all of these people is gone. The darkness leaves because it was no more than an illusion. It was fickle, destroyed by the true power of hope fueling the Hobbit's journey. See, God looks at Moses and says, I will send my power with you. You don't have to worry about what you can do to prove that I am who I am. I will prove myself in you. I will show my power to the world, and they will witness it and they will see it. See, what I think is interesting is I think God's power can be seen and evident in our families' lives today. And it doesn't take throwing a staff on the ground and turning it into a snake. I don't think we have to do that anymore. If you can do that, cool. But I don't think we have to. You know what I think God's power looks like in our families? Families that are characterized by forgiveness. Man, what a powerful thing. To be characterized not by bitterness, but by forgiveness. Characterized by peace as opposed to tension. Joy as opposed to fear. Contentment as opposed to entitlement. Grace as opposed to this constant trying to earn our place in this world. Long suffering instead of immediacy. Not perfect families. I don't think the world needs to see perfect families, see evidence of God's power. But I think he needs to see gracious families. He needs to see families that have the evidence that God is working in their lives. That is power working in this world. And God has equipped you with it. You have it already. You don't have to do anything to get it. God has given you that already. He has equipped you to send you on this incredible adventure. So God has equipped your family with his promise. He's equipped your family with his presence. He's equipped your family with his power. And last, God has equipped your family with his people. So after he does this, you'd think finally Moses is gonna do it. He can turn a staff into a snake. He can do all of these other cool tricks. Surely he will go, but Moses doesn't go. And this is his most desperate plea. And by the way, I'm not picking on Moses. I sound like I'm picking on Moses. I don't think I would respond any differently, to be fair, okay? But let's pick it up in verse 10 of chapter 4. But Moses said to the Lord, "Oh my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." Ultimately, his pushback is saying, okay, you can do that. I get that you see that I'm somebody other than I am because of the promise that you've given me. I get that you are with me, but I'm not the right guy. I can't tell you this enough. I'm not the right guy. I'm slow of speech. I'm gonna have to give speeches. I'm assuming the job description includes speeches, okay? I'm not a speech giver. I'm not eloquent. I am slow of speech. I am not the right guy for this job. So instead of asking, what can you do, God, to prove this? He's like, what can I do? And I think at the core, this was probably always the driving question that Moses had when God confronted him. Is ultimately he looked at it and said, like, that sounds great. And I would love for my people to be freed from Egypt, but I can't do it. I'm not the right guy. My family is not the right family. This is not the right time. You know, I've just started in the family business. The sheep are getting bigger. I can't go. That job description doesn't match my talents or skills or background. I can't go. And I love, you can tell that God's getting a little frustrated in his responses. It says in verse 11, he says, "Then the Lord said to him, 'Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak.' But Moses said, 'Oh my Lord, just please send somebody else.'" He's not even asking a question at this point in time. He's just anybody else. Send somebody else. And it says, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. It's like, you asked for tech time one too many times, okay? I'm upset, okay? This isn't happening. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, but I love his response. He said, "Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him." And then he says, "And take in your hands the staff with which you shall do the signs." And then finally, Moses and his family leave and respond to God. When Moses says, "What can I do?" God says, "Don't worry, I'm sending others too." You're not alone. Guys, I want you to look around. Actually look around, not pretend to look around, but look around at the people around you. Guys, you are not alone in this. You're not alone in this. If your family is here, look at your family. If your family's not here, look at the family you wish you were a part of, you know? Or not. Thought I'd slide that one in there, make sure you guys are still paying attention. You guys are not alone. You're not alone in this. Here's the thing, and this is, I think, if I could push against one of the biggest myths of discipleship and the Christian faith, is that God calls us to be lone rangers in this world, living out God's call. God does not call lone rangers. God does not call individuals. He calls communities. He calls families. He calls people who are deeply enmeshed and connected with each other. And he does this because he knows something about you that you probably also know yourself. and that is that you do not have what it takes to do this on your own. I know that might not seem like the most encouraging thing to hear from up here, but you do not have what it takes to follow the difficult road of discipleship, to journey along with God on his redemptive adventure to save the world. You don't have it on your own, but somebody else here does. Or at least somebody else has what it needs to fill in the gaps. I can't tell you how many times I, in my own personal journey, have entered into a dark night of the soul or have faced some challenge and realized I am not the right person for this job. I cannot do this. When my wife or my kids or my friends or fellow believers in the church with me have come alongside me and said, no, you can't, but I can. And we're gonna do this together. Guys, you have an incredible opportunity here to experience what God has equipped you with. God has equipped you with his people to carry out the incredible call to participate in his redemptive work in this world. You are not alone. And it doesn't take, you guys already got started. You're already here. You're already gathered together. And there are so many different ways that you can do this together with one another. I would say start by going to the vision night. Start by volunteering somewhere here. The reason why my wife and kids aren't here with me today is because she's volunteering in the kids ministry in our church. And because she's not that impressed with me. Which is fine. Get involved somewhere. Meet some of the people around you. Talk about this with your family. Talk about this with your kids if you have kids. I think you'd be shocked by the insights that they can have into the work that God is doing in this world. God has equipped you with this people. You are not alone. One of the great joys that I have in doing the work that I'm doing now is that I am continually overwhelmed by the work that God is doing through families, through regular families, through imperfect families, through dysfunctional families, to carry out what he is doing in this world. I'm a witness to it all the time, and I'm so blessed to see it. God has been using families from the beginning to accomplish his salvation. And he hasn't been using superstar families or perfect families, families that have it all together on Instagram or on Christmas cards. He's been using really messed up families. In fact, he's been using families that I would argue are probably more dysfunctional than any family here. God wants to use your family. Not some families, not a family out there, your family. Whatever that family might look like. The world, Vancouver, needs to know God's grace and forgiveness. They need to know it. And he has called your family to show it. Enemies, people who are so against the work of God in this world, they need to know that they are loved. They need to know that they are prayed for. And God has called your family to do it. The stranger and the hungry, the widow and the orphan, the corrupt executives and the disenfranchised worker, the addict, the zealot, the weary, the hurting, the lost, every single one of them needs to know the unmatched and unwavering love of Jesus Christ. And God is calling your family to share it. He has equipped you with his promise. He knows who you're gonna become. He's equipped you with his presence. He is with you now. He's equipped you with his power that you have now. And he has equipped you with his people, which we are here together now. And he has called you into this incredible redemptive adventure to save the world from sin and death. So to quote my two teenage boys, let's go.